When this show was first premiered on May the 24th in 2012 by Alan Kasuja, it was never predicted that 7 years down the road, it would be filmed inside the living room of one of us, the journalists. But these are the weird times in which we find ourselves with COVID-19. Now, the entire country is on a total lockdown that is for both goods and individuals moving around the country. The president ordered for that lockdown on Tuesday, saying that movement for cars and movement for individuals should be restricted to their homes in an effort to curb the viral spread of COVID-19. Now let's have a quick look at what stories the press did after that lockdown was announced. There was an eerie feeling of desert and silence that greeted the often busy streets of Kampala on Wednesday morning. Shops remained closed, streets empty, and the army and police roadblocks were mounted in the city. For a country whose blood ran on a social pulse, the lockdown was a near-casket experience that buried with it businesses, jobs, and movement. Newspaper stands flashed a headline many Ugandans had come to expect: a total lockdown. In the genesis of COVID-19, the global response from countries tended from travel restrictions to full national lockdowns, and Uganda, at the time with 33 cases, was not taking any chances. But its entire lifetime as a post-independent country, Uganda had never had an experience of a total lockdown. So how would the press report and put into context the events that were unfolding right before their eyes? The papers led with national headlines announcing a lockdown and spared generous space for photos that would show how the country would look like in the face of this lockdown. One daring photographer who braved both the rain and the lockdown to get these photos was Miriam Namutebi Kaitesi. Her photojournalism displayed the adherence to sanitary guidelines in the country's second largest market, Nakasero.
Talking on that story, right now, truthfully right now, I'm really scared of being around a number of people. I'm scared of being around a crowd because I could easily get exposed to the virus and get infected. But at the end of the day, I have to educate the masses. I have to bring out stories visually that can educate the masses on coronavirus. Going to Nakasero market was really an idea that I thought about for a very long time, because I wasn't sure how I would be, if I would be safe going to the market. I wasn't sure if I would be safe around a number of people, but it's something that I have to do because I'm on the front line of coronavirus. So I have to do photography that educates the masses. So it was hard, but I have to do it. I was very impressed that people downtown are taking this very seriously. In Nakasero, you don't get into the market without washing your hands. They have a tank of water. You don't get into the market without washing your hands. You don't get into the market without using a sanitizer. And they are very serious, and they have little sticks that they've put at the entrance and the exit of the market, and you don't enter without having to wash your hands and sanitizing. And they mark you with a little marker to show to the health officials. They have their own personal health officials around the market that ask you for the marked part on your body. And this is a sign that they've actually taken this serious and they're ready to fight this battle. It's very unfortunate that people in the urban centers still think this is a joke. I've seen people working out in crowds. I've seen people exercising. I've seen people having a day out on the streets, and they're there drinking and laughing. And this is a very sad thing, because if we are to fight this, if we are to fight corona, we have to fight it as a group. We have to fight it as a country. But the people that we least expected to take this serious are actually taking it serious.
Like her, the Daily Monitor photographer Michael Kakumidizi captured the national mood in markets with his front page photo on the Daily Monitor, one which even the president couldn't avoid seeing. Many journalists have, as a result of the lockdown, had to change their work routines, adopting to working from home or away from the newsrooms. This has had its impact on the kinds of stories that they can tell and the speed with which they can deliver them. Halima Athumani, who corresponds for the Voice of America, tipped journalists on the new age technology. We talked to her in a Skype interview.
These are strange times for journalists all across the world. In lockdowns, people are being asked and encouraged to stay at their homes. And yet we have to be able to tell stories. How can journalists use the spaces that they have to tell stories, and how different can those stories be during these lockdown periods?
Raymond, I think reporting at this particular time has been the most difficult for most journalists. Many journalists have been used to waking up and going to the newsrooms. This is where they have the laptops. This is where they have the desktops. This is where they have access to internet. Many journalists do not have all of these things or do not even own these things individually. So it has become such a challenging period. But I think many editors are getting to understand that, you know what, you do not really have to risk a journalist's life to get the story. Right now, I don't think we are in a space where an exclusive matters or even breaking news matters, because journalists' lives are also at stake and at risk. You know, no one is immune to coronavirus right now. So I think some editors have encouraged journalists, for example, my editors have encouraged me to use WhatsApp, mainly for the voice calls, and that is for radio stories. If we were doing TV stories, then we have to use Skype. But then you realize that when you're filming a TV story via Skype, it's a bit difficult. Even the quality of the content and the quantity of the content, because most times you're going to need a video of 2.5 minutes to do a complete story. But then you realize you don't have the cutaways, you do not have all these extra videos that will make your story compelling. So our hands are really tied at this particular time. So it's such a challenging period for journalists, but we have to make do with what we can. So there is WhatsApp, there is Skype, and now I understand there is Zoom that everyone is downloading onto their phones and laptops to have these live videos and do these interviews. So it's quite a difficult time. But I think in Uganda and everywhere, overall, really, most journalists are doing what they can, doing the best that they can to take stories and make sure that the public still stays informed despite the lockdown.
One of the other things that the lockdown has done is that it's also taken journalists out of the rooms where press conferences are happening. So they can't immediately ask for clarity. One of those incidents that we saw was when the president addressed the country on Monday and announced a lockdown, but no journalist could ask him for clarity on what he was giving as his address. And that, of course, eventually led to a second clarification address. How can journalists work with the information they have to make it more accessible and make it easy to use for the people that are consuming their content?
You know, I think even the public also has to maybe appreciate the conditions under which journalists are working. Right now, I feel like we have been turned into some sort of stenographers or secretaries, because you're basically reporting what someone has said. But I think now it is more of trust the information that you get. We cannot question the information that we get. Everything that we have right now is basically one way. Because the fact that this is a health bit or a health story, there's so many things that you'd want to take into consideration. You know, you would like to get different views from different people. But you find that even the doctors or the researchers or the people that would give you a different opinion are a bit skeptical. They're not really sure about what kind of information am I going to give you, but also stay safe for my own security so that I do not contradict the government or what the president or the Minister of Health is saying. So I think right there is the challenge, that right now, even our sourcing has become quite difficult. So we have to worry, right? It's as if, to a certain extent, I would say we are almost doing PR for the government because of this virus. But I think that's a position that we've been pushed to. Hopefully, when things calm down and we are able to report more freely, we can actually now go back and do follow-up stories to give the people the real truth on the ground. But right now, everyone is at risk. So we just have to make do with what we are given, unfortunately.
My final question to you, you've been a health reporter yourself, so you know the turns and bends of health reporting. Do you feel like Ugandan journalism has offered this health pandemic story the weight it deserves?
Can you ask that again? Sorry.
Do you feel like Ugandan journalism has offered this pandemic the weight of reporting that it requires and the accuracy of reporting that it requires?
I think the Ugandan journalists have tried. Unfortunately, I think we have a public that has undermined the effect and the I think the public has, to a certain extent, undermined the impact of this coronavirus, and this takes me to all these videos and all these photographs of people who are running around, and so you keep wondering, are we as the media not telling people that, hey, in Italy, almost between 900 to 1,000 people are dying daily. If it comes down to us, this is what we have. For example, look at our health system. What do we have? Do we have enough ICU beds? Do we have enough ventilators? Do we have enough respirators to take care of a population? For example, 900 people is a lot of people. That is almost one whole village wiped out. Why are we not still seeing Ugandans saying, hey, I'm going to stay home, I'm going to stay locked down until this passes? So I don't know if it is us as the media that has failed the public to show them the impact of this coronavirus, or it is just the public saying, you know what, I think the media is just exaggerating as usual, they exaggerate situations. Sometimes I think maybe because also as the media, you do not want to completely show people all these coffins, these whole lines of coffins in morgues and in hospitals and in churches in outside countries, because that already people have gloomy lives right now, and you do not want to worsen the situation. So it becomes a bit of a challenge. You do not know how else or how better to make people still want to watch news, but also do not depress them after watching a news item. But I think as journalists have tried their level best, they are showing the world that this is what is happening. But we just need, to be honest, I feel like our hands are tied to a certain extent. I think we're in a catch-22 where you don't know how much information is going to be helpful and how much is not going to be. Because we want people to still continue and have normal lives despite the circumstances, despite the conditions under which we are living right now. So you do not want to see people, go running around in groups because they want to stay fit, because they want to jog around. But also you want to remind them that as much as you are seeking for fitness, remember this virus, when it comes, it is going to wipe away everything, literally everything. And that's what we need to keep at the back of our heads.
All right, Halima, thank you so much for speaking to us. Of course, you're speaking to us from your house. Thank you so much also for keeping in the room and maintaining social distances. Have yourself a good day.
You too.
For Uganda, there needs no introduction for the murky relationship between the press and security agencies. And with the enforcement of a total lockdown, there was definitely going to be a lot to look out for if the press was going to cover anything at all. And in Intungamo, where Perez Rumanzi of the Daily Monitor covered the lockdown, this is what happened.
I had to move out a bit, take some pictures after being asked by my editor, take some pictures about the compliance of the curfew. People were running and rushing back home. It was at 7:30 p.m. and these police officers and the army had just started enforcing the curfew regulations. Everyone was rushing home and carrying kids, women running away, and everything was like beginning. Remember, this was the first day of the curfew, and everyone had not anticipated what would happen. So I take this camera and start taking pictures of the people going back home. The first people who were enforcing the LDU, they greeted me and passed by me. Then there came the second group, which had the commanders of this curfew. There was the captain of the army, and who had the other three army officers and two policemen. These were non-rank, but they were known to me. They called me from the opposite side of the road and told me, "Rumanzi, what are you doing there?" I said I was taking some pictures about what this was running. They came and we interacted for about 2 minutes. Then after we were interacting, just casually, one of them picks a stick and hits me in the back. Say, you give us that camera that you are taking the pictures with. He said, I am taking these pictures and I want to send them for my paper. You shouldn't take our pictures. It all of a sudden became a mess. And they started hitting me, demanding the camera. Then after I said I can't hand over my camera. So they had to hit me until they took the camera. First, they were demanding that I delete the pictures that I had taken. But I said, there is no way you can tell me to delete the pictures. Yet I am doing my legal part as a citizen of Uganda and as a journalist. So this guy hit me. They used sticks. They used big wires to hit my back, to hit my arm, to hit me everywhere. And one of them actually threw a blow at me. And as I almost fell down, I just handed over the camera and they took it. The policeman said to come and pick it from the police office in the morning. And in the morning at around 8, I went to the police. There was no one to give me the camera. I was calling the DPC. The DPC's phone were still off. Later, I stayed at police until at around 10 when I got the contact. When I got through to the DPC, then the DPC had to call the counter and had to call the office in charge of traffic operations so that the camera is handed over back to me. I picked my camera and just went back home. After picking my camera, that's when I had to rush to hospital now. But I couldn't go to hospital because it was curfew time, so I had to fast suffer. It was curfew time and I couldn't go to any hospital because the roads were locked and I couldn't travel in the curfew. So I had to start in the night, then in the morning go back, go to police, pick my camera, then I go to hospital. I went to a clinic, they gave me some medication, and actually they made me safe. I still have some injuries on my back, on my arms, and on my legs. But I move. I now work. I'm okay, I think.
All right. Okay. Thank you so much, Prince.
Oh, thank you so much.
More peculiar than the lockdown, though, was the curfew that was announced for after 6 p.m. Many of the Ugandans who are alive today have never in their lifetime seen what a curfew looks like. And now we'll take a look at Solomon Kawesa's story that was done to show Ugandans what happened when the first curfew was announced in Uganda.
In the 1970s, during the regime of President Idi Amin Dada, a war between Uganda and Tanzania broke out following Uganda's attack on the Kagera region in Tanzania. In retaliation, the Tanzanian forces attacked Uganda through massacre. Immediately, Amin declared a curfew to avoid a surprise night attack. A few days later, Vincent Mulindwa, a resident of Ndibulungi village, Butuntumla sub-county in Luwero district, took his pregnant wife to deliver at Nakaseke Hospital. Although the operation was successful, the baby didn't survive, and he narrates the hardship he went through to return to his village when the curfew hour found him still on the way.
Okuleeta omwana nakyo kyali kizibu omufu kubanga bwe nalinnya tugenda okutuuka ekasana awawali akatale kulengera mu maaso nga eriyo road block obudde bukyali misana navaako nentambula nempitira eyo emmotoka z'abasirikale zaatambulangamu okulaba emmotoka nemwekweka ene tutambula twatuuka sawa banga kumpinga mukawanga.
Moses Matovu, one of the founders of Afrigo Music Band, was in Kampala at the time.
Amaduuka tegalinga magali n'ebiduka nga bitambula wabulayo curfew nga yakwatako essaawa ezo boli wadduuka olina okumanya nti nzigalawo ba 12 ovuga taxi omanya nti 12 teri kutambula kaŋŋambe emu kuva ku ssaawa emu.
He says bars, dance halls and other entertainment places would operate from 2 p.m. to about 5 p.m.
Tusobola okudda eka naye nga bw'omanyi obudde budduka oyinza okwekanga ebula 5 okuwera emu kati nojja n'ogwa mu basirikale ne baba nga bakubuuza lwaki ebintu ng'ebyo.
Matova and Mulindwa say that roadblocks were everywhere and sometimes the soldiers would find them home and demand for bribes.
Batambulanga ne mu byalo n'akusaba ssente. N'agamba enkoko eyo njagala n'ogigoba n'agitwala.
Earlier in 1966, there was a curfew shortly after the exiling of the Kabaka of Buganda, Edward Mutesa II. The curfew is said to have lasted for close to a year. Tito Okello Lutwa's regime is also remembered for repeated curfews and roadblocks. Matovu says that this is when Ugandans got into the habit of partying till morning.
Omuntu tasobola kudda ki kati mutandika essaawa ng'emu ey'ekiro ate mpaka 12 ez'okumakya abantu ne balyoka badda eka nga tumanyi okukuba kati ku ssaawa 12 nga busaasaana abantu ne bakuba enduulu kubanga bakeesezza gye bayitanga ekikeesa.
They advised the youth who are experiencing curfew for the very first time to obey the authorities. Solomon Kawesa, NTV.
Welcome back. We remind you that these, again, are not ordinary times for the world. Close to 2.5 billion people are under lockdowns all across the world in many different countries. In Africa alone, over 20 countries have effected lockdowns and curfew to be able to curb the spread of COVID-19. But this also means that in all the industries across the world, the lockdown has had its specific impact. For the press in Uganda, it was never imaginable that this time, in a period like this, would happen. So, to understand what the press was going through, we talked to the industry leaders to give us their perspective.
No, the last time we had a curfew, there were no newspapers.
How does it look like now when you walk into your office in the morning?
I mean, luckily enough, by the way, we had these anticipated situations. So 2 weeks before even when they were still announcing, saying, you know, this disease is everywhere but hasn't yet come here, we made a decision to start working off-site. So we sent away our sub-editors, we sent away very many people, our reporters, said go and work from home. So by the time it became necessary for us to comply with these restricted conditions, we had been away from office for 2 weeks. The whole redesign was executed by people who were not on site. So our newsroom is currently empty.
We have had crisis before. We've had war, we've had, Ebola, we've had HIV, but I don't think there's been anything like this before in terms of the global spread of the problem and the challenges. Because you see, when you're planning as a media house, you're planning for contingencies. You're always assuming that your people can still go out and report and then come back in and tell the story, and that your audiences are still available. So you're dealing with, on the one hand, audiences that have been confined, and on the other hand, journalists who are unable, to go out and report freely. So it's completely unprecedented.
Actually quite different. It has a very funny feel. It feels like a cross between Christmas time and wartime. And I am from that generation that has seen war, 79, 85, 86. It's very eerie. It feels a bit like that. Even the uncertainty, the feeling of what's coming next is not clear. It's just that there's no violence, but you have the same type of feeling.
I think those of us who've been around the newsrooms for a while, the things that we have been preaching for many, many years is that journalism must be relevant to audiences. You need to, if you take the long continuum of journalism, it starts out, 1500s, thereabouts, as just reportage of this happened, or it's a war report, 10 people killed, enemy territory, taken over, or shipping reports. It's just very basic, almost prosaic information. then you go to, just covering bits. This is what happened in Parliament, this is what happened in the courts, and so on and so forth. So there's been a lot of that for centuries. We're now at a point whereby we need to give information that is functional and that is relevant, that is credible. People need to know, where should I take my kids to school? People need to know, which neighborhood should I live in? Should I go back to school for a second degree? Should I build a house? Should I rent a house? Should I buy a house? So yes, the news as we traditionally know it remains important, but we're now having to do a lot more functional information, but to do it with context, with nuance, and with, in a manner that is accessible, and not just based on experts, but also on lived experience. So something like the COVID crisis is challenging us to tell stories differently. For instance, people are now having to do homeschooling. That's an opportunity to, how do you homeschool your kids? How do you manage being with your kids for a longer time than you traditionally do? How do you manage friction in relationships if people get cooped up in one space for a long time? And I think the journalism that survives is the journalism that will be able to identify the need and then serve it consistently.
The power dynamics have changed completely. It's just that people don't realize it yet. They think things are still the same. No, they're not. It also means that the way we hold people to account is going to be different. It doesn't mean that you stop holding them to account. It means you're going to hold the person to account in a very different way. We just need to figure out how. So what am I talking about? We are used to this thing that accountability is about asking government to account for money. And that's why we're excited with this supplementary budget, because that's the only way we know how to hold governments accountable. And because we are lazy. Yet, if I was a serious journalist, the first thing I would be questioning is, are our health people handling this in a competent way? That's what the public wants to know. And how do you do that? You go and find out, how have different countries handled this epidemic? Instead of focusing on the deaths in America, we should be focusing, for instance, on the incompetence of the Italians vis-a-vis the competence of the Chinese. Instead of looking at the old paradigms, what have the Indians done differently? Why? So instead of looking at Eritrea as a dictatorship, we should look, what did the Eritreans do? What is it about the Eritrean things that make it go? So if you look at North Korea, how come North Korea was not touched? So journalists, if you want to hold the government or the public bodies accountable, there is something you're going to do. It's not just exposés and investigations. It is investing in knowledge about the subject on which you want to hold the government or the public officials accountable. Do you understand when the minister says they're putting aside 400 billion to pay debts? Okay, which debts? Who are going to be the priorities? Read about the debt. Who has read about the public debt? Nobody. None of us journalists. We just go to Parliament, we hear a statement, then we come and start mouthing off on the talk shows in the evening. That's not the... So it's going to take a lot of... We're going to have to revisit journalism as we know it. We're going to have to think, if I'm going to hold a minister accountable, I must indicate superior knowledge. How do I get superior knowledge? So many of us are going to fall out of the profession because it's going to be... The bar is going to rise for you to practice good, solid journalism. Yeah.
Trust is a credit card transaction rather than a debit card transaction. You give the government the benefit of the doubt to begin with. If they say, for instance, we are going to distribute food to vulnerable people. So you start out by saying, okay, that's a good thing, and it's important and we should do it. But journalism should not fall over itself and become a lapdog to whatever officialdom says. So if the government say it's going to distribute food to vulnerable communities, then we have a responsibility to ask, how much food, where is it coming from, what is the cost of the items that you're buying, how are you selecting the beneficiaries, and so on and so forth. not, because we are the guys that can ask those questions in real time. There will be, no doubt, parliamentary, inquiries, Auditor General reports, but those things happen 2-3 years after the fact. So it would be an abdication of responsibility if journalists merely take what is offered to them, and just convey it to the public. I think, yes, we must give the government the benefit of the doubt and assume that they mean well and are doing the best that they can to help, but we must ask questions. If it's the quarantine, it's a difficult thing, difficult to manage, but we need to ask questions. Have people been allowed to get out that shouldn't have gotten out? Have people gone in and sneaked out, their relatives because they're VIPs, right? Are people being treated humanely? Is the position not to test, for instance, the correct thing? Because we see what other countries are doing. They are spreading out the tests. We've said it's too expensive, it doesn't really make sense. We need to take those arguments and hold them up against the light of medical advice from other countries, and so the journalism should never, even in times of crisis, should never turn into public relations. In fact, it is during the time of crisis, whether it's war, whether it's pandemics, that journalism must ask the right questions. Quite frankly, I don't know. We've seen from other countries, China, which was the start and the first epicenter of the disease, almost kind of returning to normal, if there is no more after this, which suggests that maybe the medical issue, and there's a bit of experience with viral epidemics. They kind of burn themselves out, or they then settle into kind of a plateau period. We've seen that with Ebola, we've seen that with HIV. It might come back, in the winter in the West and then come back here. So there are very many unknowns from the medical point of view. What is probably more fascinating is the socio-economic legacy of the problem. You're going to have businesses that are going to shut down. You're going to have people who are going to lose their jobs. You're going to have a recession.
Now, at the heart of military and media operations for many years has been what many people call improvisation. And for the first time in 7 years, the Fourth Estate has had to improvise on how it will be shot. To let you in on how this program has been produced, I'll give you a little bit of a back-end feel of what's happening. We're filming this from inside my home. Every interview that has been done on this program has been done either in the home of a person or away from the places that we normally film it from. And due to observance of social distancing rules, many of the interviews that we've had have not been one-on-one interviews. We do hope that you enjoyed this program, but also we do hope that this doesn't become our new normal as we get into more murky times with COVID-19. But for now, I'll leave you with what Ugandans on social media have been doing in improvisation to catch up with what's happening on COVID-19. Now, it's not only us in traditional media that have had to learn new ways of doing things. Even you people on social media have learned new ways of how to do your stories. What would it look like if you would start your own TV network during the quarantine period? In the Fourth Estate, we'll leave you with Joe Kahirimbanyi, who now has what they call the Quarantine News Network. Thank you so much for tuning in to the Fourth Estate. We do hope to catch you next week. I'm Raymond Mujini. Catch you next week on the Fourth Estate.
In Kampala, all over Kampala, Kiboko's there tonight. Here in Bugolo, even in Muyenga, Kiboko's there tonight.